So one of the very common questions I hear from nervous flyers and travelers alike is what happens in the event that there's a problem during the takeoff roll? A lot of folks imagine that the airplane may just go off the end of the runway or we don't have a plan, which really couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, before every single departure, we actually brief exactly what we're going to do should we have a problem before we decide to actually take the airplane flying. That speed that we make that decision at is what's called V1, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute. And the other option is, well, what happens if we have a problem after we decide to take the airplane flying? Once we've reached that speed of V1, are we going to take the airplane flying? Where are we going to go? So we actually have a very deep conversation before every single departure on exactly what we're going to do in both scenarios. So today we're going to talk about what's called the rejected takeoff. And what that means is anytime before we get to that takeoff decision speed of V1, we actually make the decision to discontinue the takeoff. We essentially stop on the runway. It's actually exactly what we do. There's multiple regimes of the takeoff. And before that V1 speed, and let me define V1. V1 is the last speed in which we can make an action to stop the takeoff, meaning we have to bring the thrust levers back to idle, we start applying the brakes, and we get the airplane stopped on the runway. The reason we use that number is, one, we may not have enough runway remaining to safely stop the aircraft once we reach that V1 speed. And the other is we have enough airflow moving over the wing that with the remaining runway, we can safely accelerate on a single engine and still take the airplane flying. Aerodynamically, it'll allow us to climb away from the runway. These numbers are calculated before every single takeoff, depending on the weather, the weight of the airplane, the airport, so on and so forth. Again, today we're talking just about the first part of that though. What if something happens before we get to V1? So there's two parts before V1. There's the low speed regime, and the low speed regime is 0 knots to 100 knots. We do everything in aviation in nautical miles per hour. And it depends on the airline you work for. So some airlines are 80 knots, then goes into the high speed regime. Some airlines are 100 knots that goes into the high speed regime. I'm going to use 100 knots for this example. So below 100 knots, we're actually going to be in a no-go mindset. And that's because it's not that hard on the airplane. The brakes aren't going to get crazy hot. It's easier for us to deal with that problem on the ground than it is for us to take the airplane flying. Now above 100 knots, but before that V1 speed, we're now in what's called the high speed regime. In this regime, we're in a go mindset. We actually want to take the airplane flying. And the reason is it's really hard on the airplane to stop it once we're in that high speed regime, meaning it's going to overheat the brakes. We may have the tires melt, all sorts of things that would cause us problems that we really don't want to have. And quite frankly, it's easier to take the airplane flying and deal with a problem and just come back around. The airplane can fly on a single engine for hours and hours and hours. And so that's what we would rather do. Now there's that speed though, in which we're not going to be able to accelerate enough to get the airplane lifted off the ground. So we're going to make the decision to reject the takeoff. So we're actually going to perform what's called that high speed reject. Why would we reject the takeoff in a high speed regime? Something like an engine failure, something like any fire, or the aircraft not being able to fly, a truck pulls out on the runway in front of us, anything like that that would cause us to say, you know what, it's better to actually stop this takeoff. So in the briefing that I would have with the first officer before we ever go flying, I would say, hey, from 0 to 100 knots, this is exactly what I expect you to do. And this is what you're going to hear me do if we have any of these problems. Above 100 knots, we're then going to go into this decision-making framework. Here's what I'm going to do. If we have this problem, I'm going to bring the thrust levers back to idle. You're going to see me bring the reverse thrust out. You're going to see us make sure that the airplane is actually braking as it's supposed to. We have automatic braking on these airplanes. And what I expect you to do is let the tower know what we're doing, where we are on the airport, and if we need the fire trucks to come out and check the airplane out. And I also expect you to make a couple of call outs to help me maintain my situational awareness. And then we're going to go to the appropriate checklist. And depending on the situation, I will dictate which checklist that is. So we go through this whole song and dance, and then we move into, well, what happens if we take the airplane flying and there's a problem? Then we go through that. That is outside of the scope of this video though. So we're going to talk exclusively about the rejected takeoff. And in fact, we're going to perform one right now. So the first thing I'm going to do is click the parking brake off. Of course, all of our checklists are complete. We're on runway 1 right in San Francisco. And I'm going to push the thrust up here. We're going to let the engine stabilize at about 50% N1. You can think of that as kind of RPM of the engine, if you will. Once the engine spool up and stabilize, I'm now going to push them up to what's called flex. As we accelerate, we get our flex. I'm looking at my primary flight display, which is where that blue and orange is. It says man flex SRS. That's what I want it to say. There's 100 knots. I'm now in the high speed regime. I want to take the airplane flying. Now let's say we get an engine failure right here. I'd say reject. I bring the thrust levers all the way back to idle. The reverse actually comes out, the reverse thrust. The airplane is slowing down. I'm making sure that the maximum brakes are being applied. We're slowing the aircraft down. We're letting tower know who we are, where we are, what we're doing. We're going to bring the airplane safely to a stop here on the runway. And now we're gonna start to make decisions. Hey, what do we wanna do? Which checklist do we wanna run? Do we need to evacuate this airplane? How are we gonna go through actually accomplishing that? So those are the procedures that we actually do. But that's what a rejected takeoff looks like. It's gonna feel quite exciting in your seat, if you will. You're gonna feel a very significant forward motion as we slow down. These brakes really can slow the airplane down well. It's gonna get loud. And there's going to be announcements that go on and things of that nature. So that's what a rejected takeoff is. It's meant to keep us safe. We have all of these decision-making parameters in place so that we always know what to do at any given time with any given situation on the airplane on any given day. I hope this is helpful. If you have any questions, please drop them below.